Welcome to An Unconventional Life, a podcast where we share stories about the crazy 1% out there who earned their doctoral degrees and then went on to use them in crazy, cool, unique, and unconventional ways. Here's your host, astrophysicist turned teacher, author, dissertation coach, and more, Dr. Russell Strickland.
Hello and welcome to An Unconventional Life. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Strickland, the founder and CEO of Dissertation Done. I have with me today Dr. Erin Kelley, who is a professor of English at Dallas College in Dallas, Texas. She has her Ph.D. in literature, but also a doctoral in the law, a J.D. She went to Texas Tech Law School and worked in the criminal, the district attorney's office for a while. Now she really enjoys instructing her students, speaking at conferences, and writing about the law and literature, and has had some chances to speak on the topic as well, which I can't wait to talk to her about. Dr. Kelley is joining us via phone because she's in the Dallas area, which is still ravaged by the recent storm. If you guys remember in 2021, the winter of 2021 is when it snowed on Dallas. and
Right.
I thank you for being a good sport and joining us here today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
You're quite welcome. For everybody, today's episode is brought to you by Dissertation Done. If you are an adult doctoral student and you are about to face your dissertation or in the middle of facing your dissertation right now, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done. And let's see if you might be a good fit for our Fast Track Your Dissertation coaching program, where we help students get through the dissertation process as quickly as possible. Our guidance and support normally helps you to avoid a lot of frustration in that process. And if by any chance you've already finished your dissertation, you're out there in the expert space and you want to amplify your message, the best way to expand your authority, in addition to having a first name doctor, is to be a published author. And we can get you from a blank page to a published book in less time than you imagine possible. Check us out at dissertationdone.com/book. And we have a cohort of new authors getting started soon. So check that out. Again, Dr. Kelley, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So I usually start off by asking folks what possessed you to pursue a doctoral degree, and we'll get to that. But you did a few things before. So tell us a little bit about the career path. I know I have a very circuitous career path myself. But yours is quite interesting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll tell you, if you were talking to my child self or my teenage self looking back, there would have been no way that that small person, that younger person would have thought that this is what I'm going to be doing with my life.
I think that's a good thing, quite honestly. I
do
think
too.
that a lot of the most interesting people, in a sense, still don't know what they want to be when they grow up. Because if you ask me, in 5 or 10 years, I might be doing something very different than what I'm doing right now. I'm going to continue to evolve, I'm sure. And I think that's one of the things that makes life interesting.
Yeah, I totally believe that. And from an early age, I was just this lifelong, lifetime kind of learner type.
Absolutely.
But I was also a first generation college graduate. So that presented kind of its own problems. I was a lot of times having just to feel my way through things and try to figure out, especially, the academic path. But it turned out that I was really good at school, especially when I went on to college. And I started college as a community college student because that was we didn't really have the means. My family just didn't have the means at the time for me to go on to university. So I started there and I just fell in love with higher education really early on. But you were talking about being kind of this lifetime learner, and maybe you'll be doing something different in 5 years or what have you. I was the same way. I loved learning so much that it ended up that I had almost a double major and a double minor. I got my English degree, and obviously I had that major, but I had met all the pre-med requirements, so that was almost its own major in and of itself, and was a psychology minor and a chemistry minor. So I just really, really loved school. I felt comfortable at the institution, at the university. I felt like I was just at home. It was just it was just kind of this innate feeling that I should be there. But I didn't know for sure as I got closer to graduation, didn't know for sure really still, what I wanted to be. There were so many things that I found so interesting, but I wasn't sure what path or direction I should take. I thought about maybe getting into a Ph.D. program for literature at that time, but it looked so daunting to me, just that process. And, a lot of times you kind of are on your own, especially, towards the end of the PhD. And I had this imposter syndrome, and I just felt like there was just no way I could do it. So I kind of just fell into law school. I ended up going to law school, and I liked parts of it. I liked criminal law, I liked civil rights, constitutional law, but I didn't have just that drive and that passion and that just love for learning so much in law school. And, that was a sign. That early on, that was a sign, but, I was 23 years old, 24, and you just kind of barrel through because those are the kinds of people that we are. We're go-getters, and we're just going to keep going and go through it. And so that's what I did. And I ended up right out of law school
when I was younger as well. And I really liked the idea of, arguing things and coming up with a perspective and presenting things in a certain way.
Yes.
But the notion of you have to know all of the cases in all of those books just did not appeal to me at all. One of the things I've always enjoyed about science is the leverage involved in science. You learn one thing in science and it's like a tool and you can use it everywhere. It's like you get a new screwdriver and all of a sudden there's all of these things that you can twist, or you get a new hammer. And that's what I felt like science is like. But I felt like some of the things in, history or, law or something like that, you learn one thing, one thing. And if you want to know something else, you got to go learn something else. You can't really leverage one thing into another.
Yeah. And I mean, the law is consistently changing. It's consistently evolving. It's not a stagnant tool by any means. And, that definitely can be frustrating, especially if you live in a certain state and once another state is doing something else, and then you have federal laws, it can be a lot. I love argumentation. Obviously, I'm an English professor now, and I loved that aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
But, that was about it. I had little moments in law school, and I certainly learned so much from it. My critical thinking skills just shot to the roof, and I was definitely prepared for grad school after that. If I wasn't already, I definitely was after law school. But yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things. I got a job right out of law school in the district attorney's office. Loved the people. It was an excellent place to be. I mean, just a wonderful, wonderful environment. But I was also, I had trouble for the first time in my life. I had trouble with the bar exam. And talk about another sign. That should have been another sign right then. But, I had already gotten a job. I was having trouble really, I had never struggled in academics ever before. I'd taken plenty of standardized tests, the whole thing. But I just couldn't force myself to have the level of commitment really to study for that bar exam. This time it didn't work just to force myself and to, keep burrowing through everything.
Right.
And it showed, that's how it was supposed to be too, it turns out. But at the time it was really hard. It was an existential identity crisis for me. I'd never, quote, failed, anything in academia before. And I took it hard. I took it really hard.
How do you think you decide whether something was as a sign, as you put it, that this is just not what I really want to be doing, or whether you've hit a ceiling? Because I think it's important. A lot of doctoral students, folks that are working on their dissertations, sometimes think they've hit a ceiling, when in fact, I don't believe they have. But it's just because they haven't had those struggles before, because they haven't felt like I'm trying and I'm not getting there. they haven't had those feelings before, that they interpret it as, this is it. I can't go any further. I've hit my wall, so to speak, a ceiling, and I can't get through. How do you make that decision that this is something that the reason why I'm not being successful is because my heart's not in it and I really don't want to be doing it, and so I should stop, as opposed to I just need to try harder, I can make this happen?
For me, it's all about, and I tell my students this, if you want to go to law school, if you want to go to graduate school, you need to come in with a mindset of, I cannot not live without being an attorney, or I cannot not live without my PhD. You want to be that invested. And if you are not, to me, looking back, I would have told my younger self, but there's a reason why you're not invested. Trust your instinct.
Right.
But the PhD is very different, though. Sometimes you will feel like you're failing, but for a PhD, I found, especially in that dissertation, you have to just keep pushing.
Yeah, true. But you do need to know why you're doing it. I do believe that that's very, very important. All of our students, that's where we start our conversation. Why is it that you're doing this? What is it that you want to accomplish? And that's really because I'm looking for students whose goal is outside of the traditional notion of I'm going to be a professor or something like that. That's not the type of goal that we're aligned to help in terms of at Dissertation Done. We're aligned to help people who want to graduate as soon as possible. And so if if the reason why you're getting your degree is associated with finishing the degree and moving on and doing other things with it, then that's important. That's an important first step for you to realize, an important thing for you to understand, because then you're going to approach your dissertation in a different way than if you want it to be in academia for the rest of your life. But if your why isn't strong, if it's not, you don't have a really good reason why, then it becomes very easy to float away from the program, just not do the things that you know that you need to do. Most people don't affirmatively quit. Like, I don't see anybody who walks into the dean's office and says, take this job and shove it kind of thing. It's just a receding. It's a not doing the things that you need to do, doing them less and less, being less and less committed. And it's insidious. It can happen without students knowing it. And so you have to be committed to your why and know what you're doing and how you're going to get to the end in order to continue to persist, as you put it.
Yeah, and that why, especially when you're at the dissertation, you've got to have it down. And I actually did not. I had gone back to graduate school. Eventually, I landed back in graduate school, zoomed through the master's program, started the PhD coursework, and was getting through that quite quickly. And it was starting to dawn on me, I've got to figure out what I'm going to write my dissertation on. I've got to figure that out. And at that time, I didn't know. I had no clue. And so I knew I had the wherewithal. Okay, I need to step back and do something different for right now. And that's what I did. I mean, it wasn't, it was 6 or 7 years later that I finally found that why. And that was the combination of law and literature, and looking at both texts in that kind of unique perspective. That's how I found it. And I found it in a very surreptitious way, I guess you could say. But yeah, I mean, if you don't have that why, the dissertation, my guess is you're going to be really lucky if it happens. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I consider important that I talk to our students about quite a lot is that your why does not have to inform your research necessarily. Your why could be, for a lot of folks, it's I want to get this degree so that I can do other things and help other people with the degree. It's not staying in academia and doing more research. And if I'm not going to be staying in academia and doing more research, quite honestly, your dissertation is not very relevant to you. It's huge. It's a big project and you have to get it done, but it doesn't have to be something that kind of gets you jumping out of bed in the morning. Getting the dissertation done could be the thing that's getting you jumping out of bed in the morning. And you just have to make sure that you're focusing and getting through that project as quickly as possible. I know a lot of traditionalists will say that your dissertation has to be the thing that sets your hair on fire. But we've had a lot of students where that's not the case. They got something done that their committee could approve. They could move on. Then they could do these things they really wanted to do to help out in their community and to help out in other places.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as committee, and I tell my students this, figure out what your professor wants. Do you want, what is your end game? Okay, you want an A in the class. Figure out what your professors want and give it to them. Figure out what your committee wants, give it to them. Even if you don't agree with the revision that you ended up making in your dissertation, that's fine. Your end game is to get that PhD.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, if you want to fix it later, you can write a journal article later on that part or on that
Or
chapter.
just write a book.
And you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, or your book, yeah, so you're absolutely. But, you know, if you want to make your life easy, do the best you can. Choose your battles very, very wisely. And, you know, it's a life lesson. What does your boss want? Give it to them.
Yep.
You can argue with them, but what's the easiest way? You know, the path of least resistance.
So I would argue at some point you have to stop that. If you spend your whole life grinning and bearing it, I don't think that's a really rewarding life. But in the dissertation phase, I certainly agree with you. I think that is it's a moment in time. It's a long moment. It's a difficult moment, but it is something that you get past. It's by design. Yeah, we don't want to say that we get past years of our life, year after year after year, by design. I want you to enjoy that and to be fulfilled and to be enriched and all of those sorts of things. But yeah, when you talked about give them what they want in the dissertation phase, I wholeheartedly agree with you there. I tell my students that your name is on the author page, and they talk about it being your dissertation. It's not. It's your committee's dissertation. Think about it as you're building a suit of clothes or a custom home or something like that. And if it's a suit of clothes, you could build it so that it's perfect and it looks great on the rack, but you've got to put it on that committee. And if one committee member's left arm is longer than their right arm, well, then your suit better have a left arm that's longer than the right arm. And even though when that's hanging on the rack, it looks like something's wrong, it fits your committee. And that's the goal in every way.
Yeah.
And know that your dissertation isn't going to be finished when it's right, because there is no right or wrong. You can go into the library in your school, in your department, pull out a dissertation from last year, take that author's name off, put your name on, give it to your committee. And I guarantee you that they will look over that dissertation and they will write you a list as long as your arm of things that are wrong with that dissertation.
Very true.
And then you stop and you think about it. It's like, well, how could there be anything wrong with this dissertation? The guy graduated. And that's right. That person did graduate because that dissertation was right for his committee or for her committee, not for yours.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah. And at that time too, it was at that moment, that's what, that was what was good enough.
Yeah.
And go with it.
That's a good point too. Hopefully if you find something that's recent, then the moment in time thing won't be as relevant, but that is true too. Standards do change over time, and what universities focus on and what they consider. And when I say standards change, that doesn't mean that it gets harder to graduate or it gets easier to graduate, just that they focus on different things sometimes. And so, that's true too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah,
you went through a previous career, you got your law degree. It sounds like that's the way that you would want to go, but then you figured out maybe that's not the right thing for you. Go back into go for a PhD now, because that's a reasonable decision. I think I'm having trouble passing the bar exam, so let me go get a PhD.
I know, right? Let's do something 20 times harder. Why don't we? Oh, okay. Great idea.
But as you said, you found something that spoke to you, and that's what's so important. What was the dissertation process like for you once you kind of hit on that notion of this is what I'm interested in now?
It was difficult. I was working full time. What I had been doing, and how I had figured out that I needed to get my PhD, was because I had started finally, through all these twists and turns, I had started adjuncting, being an adjunct professor, which is a contract professor. Don't get a lot of money. It's horrible how much adjuncts get paid. But I had fallen in love so much with teaching that I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get experience at the collegiate level because I was going to be applying for a full-time job.
Okay.
And for me, for quite a few years, I had been an adjunct at several different institutions, and kind of piecemealing everything, contract to contract, semester to semester, getting my bills paid. And I knew though, but I would get into these full-time interviews, and I would make it usually to the first level, and then I would just phase out. And I figured out after about 2 years of that, I've got to get my PhD. I have in my field, a PhD is really almost necessary at, whether at a community college or at a university. Obviously the university, a PhD is a requirement, but at the community college level, pretty much in my field as well. And sure enough, the minute I got the PhD, I got a job. So yeah, but it was difficult because I was hustling. I was here in Dallas. I had been working in Nevada, but I'd moved back to Dallas to finish up the PhD that I had started at the University of Texas at Dallas. And I was hustling. Dallas has, thankfully, a lot of community colleges and universities in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So, I was running around. At one point, I was working at 5 different campuses. It was a hustle. And then I was in that PhD program full time. So, it was tough. It was really, really tough. And there were times when I didn't think I had the mental or physical or emotional energy to do it, but I kept barreling through because it had taken me so long, and I had finally figured my path and my purpose. There was just no way I was not going to get that PhD. There was just no way.
And I think for a lot of folks, people say it in different ways, but at some point, usually before you even enroll or apply for a program, that notion of having a doctoral degree is an identity issue for folks. They consider themselves to be a doctor, whether they have done the first hour of the classwork or not. That's how they can kind of consider themselves. And it's odd because after you graduate, then you also will have that imposter syndrome where you don't really want to call yourself doctor, and you don't feel comfortable introducing yourself that way, and all of those sorts of things. But I do believe that there is a driving force. And for folks who are thinking at some point of maybe quitting or walking away, you've got to know that you're just going to feel incomplete until you go back and do it.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree.
Doctoral student earlier in my life, and through a series of things that happened when I was at school, I decided to walk away. There was a time when it made sense for me to do that, and I decided to do that. And I went on and did other things and was perfectly happy with the way things were going. But there was part of me that also kind of felt like I'd left that undone. And I ended up going back to school in a different area and earning my PhD in a different area, because that's how strong I felt like I felt like that drive was at the time. I don't think I would have been satisfied not having finished that doctoral degree if I'd left it undone for too many more years.
Yeah. And and I feel so bad. I'm sure you know plenty of people that got stuck on the PhD. I've got one friend, or on the dissertation portion of the PhD, I've got one friend that's been working on her dissertation for 10 years, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to get yourself going down that rabbit hole. I have several that never finished their dissertations. And so, it's absolutely, I can't even imagine how that would feel. I had felt that way at a certain point in time, but, I also didn't know what I was going to write about. So it was kind of a given that I needed to take a pause or what have you. But, and the fact that you've got, that dissertation done has this help for these folks, because it is, or it was for me anyway, a very, very esoteric process. I did not get any guidance. I didn't even know I had to write a literature review in my introduction. I had no idea whatsoever. And I had submitted.
Well,
I had submitted.
So the thing is, the dissertation, people will say that nobody learns, comes out of the womb knowing how to walk, but for humans, walking is a natural condition, and you figure it out. I think you could probably, unethical to do the research, but you could probably get a baby and put it out all by itself where it never sees another human being, and within 2 or 3 years it'll figure out how to walk. So that's a natural thing. But what people don't think about is, listen, the same thing is true of a dissertation. Nobody comes out of the womb knowing how to write a dissertation, and it's not a natural thing. It is definitely a man-made, very esoteric thing. Very fine details about how it needs to be done, and in what order, and what needs to be where. And there's no expectation whatsoever that somebody should just be able to intuit any of this. You have to get guidance, you have to get support from someone who's been there before to figure this all out. Now, whether that person's a friend or someone that you barely know or someone that you hire, the fact of the matter is that you're not going to get through this without some sort of guidance and mentorship, because it's so unnatural, the process that you have to make it happen.
And I couldn't agree more. And I mean, if you look at me, I mean, I was an English major. I am a very strong writer. I mean, from way back. Love to write, love to research, went to law school, could do legal writing, could do legal research, came back to graduate school, could write these 20-page papers, these 30-page papers. Yeah, and you know, writing is my thing. I mean, I am teaching writing at the time at the collegiate level. And I get to that dissertation and I was just dumbfounded. I really was. I mean, being the writer, a good writer, I really, really struggled. So you guys helping out in that way is just phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, tell us some, Dr. Kelley, about what was it like when you finished your dissertation, when your committee approved everything, it's all done, you're ready to graduate. Tell us about that experience. Did you have a defense, or what was it like to actually complete the dissertation and get it approved?
Yeah, I mean, so what the process that I went through, and they wanted you to complete your dissertation in 2 years. I completed it in 2.5 because of my work schedule, and I had my dog passed away, and I couldn't write for 2 months because I was just a mess and breathing. You know, things happen. But I finished it in 2.5 years. But how mine worked is that, I would send in chapters, and my chapter, and then I would revise and revise and revise. And my committee would sign off on each chapter. And then when they were ready, when all my chapters had been signed off, then I combined everything for one more look from everybody. And then they signed off on the whole. Then I had to defend. It. And which, it was not fun. The defense was not, and I think it's designed not to be fun. I think almost it's sometimes I'm like, are they academically hazing me maybe in a little way? Or, it was,
usually
I mean,
they comes earlier in the process, but because most people do report these days that the defense was a lot of fun. And so
I'm glad for them.
What was your experience like then?
They were still, despite they had signed off on my arguments, on, what I had, what I'd written, presented, they were still questioning things. They were still questioning pieces and really wanted me to justify, in very nuanced ways, for the big picture and also for smaller portions. I mean, probably my first, it was a 3-hour process. So the first hour and a half was really intense in that way. And then it's kind of started lessening and lessening and lessening. And probably, I would say maybe my last 10 minutes was fun. But yeah, I mean, it was, I felt like I was a defendant on the stand getting, I was getting shot left and right. And, it was challenging. It was, but, they were pleased with what I had to say ultimately, and it worked out. But yeah, I wasn't expecting that level of intensity. I will tell you that. I didn't expect it. But that's just kind of how mine went. Obviously it doesn't go that way for everybody else. But that's kind of how mine went.
Well, it depends. I mean, that definitely sounds like an old school defense.
Yeah.
Where people are, there are some professors who think that they are the guardians to the gates of the, ivory tower of academia. And if you can't push through them, then you're not worthy. And so you hear about that again, usually more of an old school mentality. Today,
Yeah.
it's much more like if the student doesn't pass the defense, it looks bad. It reflects poorly on the faculty. Why did the faculty bring the student up there? Weren't you aware that she wasn't ready to
Right.
defend yet? And if you
Hmm.
were aware, why would you put her up there? And if
Yeah.
you weren't aware, then who's doing your job? Because you should know that she wasn't ready. And so the defense
Yeah.
for
And
a
then
lot of people is more of a coronation. It's a celebration.
yeah.
It's a confirmation of the fact that we've approved your dissertation. It's done. It's in writing. Um,
Hmm.
it honestly does seem in this day and age silly to um, have you come up there and defend something for real when they've already approved it in writing.
Hmm. Well, and and kind of looking at it in that perspective, they knew that I was going to pass.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, even a difficult 3-hour afternoon, at the end of which they say, "Congratulations, doctor," is still a pretty good day.
Oh, yeah. It's all worth it. It's 100. I mean, I tell people, I mean, if this is your path and your plan, it is 100% worth all the heartache and grief and sacrifice.
Absolutely.
It really is.
So, Dr. Kelley, after you completed your defense, which it was a little bit more difficult than hopefully it's going to be for most folks, but after you got through that, what was next for you? What came after graduation?
It was a totally different world. I got offered a job in a matter of, I think, 2.5 months. And it was from Dallas College. I had been an adjunct there for the last 4 or 5 years.
So they knew you well, and as soon as
Yes.
as soon as you changed your first name to doctor, they're like, "Come on in."
Basically, yeah. I had applied, they had put up some job listings. I applied, and yeah, just kind of basically breezed through.
Yeah. And what was that like? What were you doing? Is that literature professor?
Yeah, I'm a composition and literature professor. Yes.
And what does that mean in terms of you're teaching undergrads, or at what level are you teaching now?
Yeah, I teach freshman and sophomore composition, and then I teach literature courses, world literature, American literature. I teach a gender and justice in American literature class that's really popular with students, and then I teach British literature as well. So I like all of the literatures, but the literatures can come, all kinds of different students come in. It's technically a sophomore level class, but in the summer, I will have a lot of nursing students that will take world literature for whatever reason. There's a couple of programs here in Texas to where nursing students have to take world literature. I've got seniors, juniors, and seniors from institutions come in. So yeah, the literature courses, it's kind of a sprinkle of just about anybody.
Yeah. And what is it about that you enjoy so much?
What I love about literature is that, literature is a cultural tool, just like a court case. They tell stories. They tell, whether they're historical or they're modern day, they actually tell a story about what was happening at that time in society, what was going on, what it was like, what were the problems, what was easy about the society, what was difficult. I mean, literature is a cultural tool, and it evolves with the time, and it evolves with the geographical location. So what I like to do is I like to pick out those pieces in historical literature, and I like to bring in our culture in the United States and issues that we're seeing in the present day. So the literary theory is called presentist historicism, bringing in history and the present and looking at the connections. That's what I love about literature. From any part of the world, from any perspective, literature can just continue to teach us what we were, what we are, and what we might be as a society.
Well, as someone who feels a little bit grizzled and cynical about the younger generation, hopefully they're learning from your class that cultures change over time, and that that everybody looks at things a little bit differently as we go through time. and this current cancel culture that we've got that's so prevalent these days, they would be well advised to read a little bit of history and a little bit of literature from days gone by. I mean, you can easily sit down and watch a film from 20 or 30 or 40 years ago right now and kind of bristle a little bit and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that, or that was okay, or that was acceptable back then. But the fact is that it was. And we need to understand that those ideas and ideals do change over time. And
and I mean, and also back on the, the cancel culture and things of that nature, I taught an entire composition class around the theme of understanding credibility in sources, in research, because that is really, really difficult for students these days because there's so much on the internet.
Right.
Information is everywhere. And, the credibility of sources is really, really important. And that's a big struggle. That's a big struggle, for all of us,
Right. Yeah. You have to understand what the source was, where did it come from? Do I need to believe it necessarily or not? And when you do earn a doctoral degree, you need to understand that people are going to attribute facts and reality to everything that you say. So you have to be very, very careful about being very precise about when you know what you're talking about. And we're people, even with doctoral degrees, we're people. There are times when we don't know what we're talking about, and that's okay as long as we are clear about that. Hey, I'm speculating here. Let's talk through how it might work. Maybe we could think about it this way. Those are all fine things to do, but you just have to be very careful to make that clear, because so many people will just believe whatever it is that you have to say because of the expertise that your doctoral degree, that position provides you. That's a lesson, unfortunately, the president never learned or never cared to learn, that there are a lot of people because he's the president of the United States, and that's not a completely unreasonable position. You just need that the president of the United States to be respectful of the authority he wields, and people with doctoral degrees have that similar level of credibility and authority that they have to be respectful of.
Yeah, respectful, and also really, like you're mentioning, understanding your audience, a very broad audience of all different levels of education, of beliefs, of, perspectives that folks have because of where they live and where they're from. You have to be very cognizant of all of those things. And as an expert, like the president, to me, a leader should be inclusive instead of divisive. But it's hard. I mean, it's just difficult. There's so much that we as PhDs that we have to consider now. And, on the flip side of that, some people are untrustworthy of the highly educated. They consider us elitist. I'm like as far from elitism as you can imagine. I'm from Muleshoe, Texas, for goodness sakes. But a certain demographic just does not trust higher education. They think we have an agenda or want to brainwash people. But it's just difficult. And it's part of, I think, how easily it is to exclude and to divide when we all want to try to come together instead.
Yeah, and it is important for you to be cognizant of the language that you use, and how can you include people? How can you do things to break down barriers by instead of trying to teach from up here, by telling stories and by interacting with people in a genuine way. You can trust, as opposed to people being distrustful. If you're putting yourself up here, then they feel like they're being put down there.
Yes, exactly. And going back to what we as PhD students get out of our dissertation, I'm a very firm believer in making sure that in some way, there's so many wonderful PhDs out there, so many wonderful dissertations, to try to translate that academic language or one or more of those ideas in that dissertation and somehow get it out into the general audience, get it out into the general public. We are no better than anybody else, but I think one of those ways in which we can bridge that gap is to really try to take some of what we have, what we have learned, and apply it to the outside world, get it out there for everyone, not just for, our small little group of academics.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important. We've talked a few times on the podcast about the importance of communication and making sure that you can bring some of what you learned, some of the message that you have into the public space. It's one of the reasons why I've been so, I've had a blast helping folks with writing their book that goes into the public press, because, they can get the metaphorical hair down, so to speak, instead of having to be so careful about all of your writing in an academic sense when you're writing your dissertation. Now you can be much more free to communicate with people through stories and through anecdotes and things like that, so that you can get a message across. We've had folks that have been, helping parents help their kids succeed, and just so many interesting and exciting things. We've had a person who was a teacher for a number of years who was been able to communicate with current teachers about how they can stay in love with the profession instead of feeling like they need to leave after a very few number of years. And those sorts of things are important messages for our society. And they don't just belong in academic research journals, but they belong out there on Amazon or Apple Books or whatever it might be that you read, so that people who can benefit from that can absorb that message and benefit from it, instead of just holding it back in an academic journal that no one outside of a few people.
Yeah. Well, and also what you're doing here on this podcast, you're getting people and these experts who have all different kinds of these rich, vivid stories to tell. We're all human. We need to have that kind of connection. But you're doing this on this podcast. We're sharing stories, but we're also rendering advice in a very much needed, nuanced way in this dissertation that trips so many people up. But you're doing, what you're doing with this podcast, I think is fantastic.
Well, I appreciate that. To me, if I can just help folks to understand that you're not alone out there in this process. You're not the only one that struggled through this process. Everybody struggles through it, but the struggle is worth it, because the riches on the other side, the opportunities out there are just so amazing. And and you get to do things that you really want to do, that you really enjoy doing. When you have a doctoral degree, you get to write your ticket, so to speak. And whatever it takes to get there, I think it really is worthwhile. And I encourage everybody that's has that notion, who's gone and applied to a doctoral program and enrolled, keep going. You can do it. You can finish this process.
Absolutely, for sure.
Well, Dr. Kelley, I have enjoyed talking with you today. If folks wanted to continue their conversation with you, maybe they're interested in literature or how it interfaces with the law or whatnot, what's the best way for them to reach out to you, maybe continue that conversation?
Oh, yeah, sure. I've got a website, a professional website. It's drerinkelly.com, DRERINKELLEY.com. Awesome. I'm also on social media. I'm on YouTube. You can check out my TED Talk, How Law Stigmatizes Rape Victims. I'm there on TEDx, and I'm through on YouTube. But hit me up, please. I'm happy to help anybody that needs it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we have for those of you who are listening on the podcast or maybe catching us on YouTube, we have show notes that we set up on our blog at dissertationdone.com/blog. You can find Dr. Kelley's episode there, and we'll have all her points of contact and links to her blog and to her website and to her TEDx talk, all of those sorts of things there. So go check the episode out at dissertationdone.com/blog to be able to connect into all of that goodness.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome. And thank you, Dr. Kelley, for being here with us today. I want to remind folks that today's episode has been brought to you by Dissertation Done. So if you are struggling or concerned that you might struggle with the dissertation process, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done. and we'll see if you're a good fit for our Fast Track Your Dissertation coaching program. And if you want to become a published author and get your message out there into the popular press, and not just have the dissertation sitting on the dusty bookshelves not getting read, then reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/book. We'll see if you're a good fit for our Expand Your Authority program there. Again, Dr. Kelley, thank you so much for joining us today. Technological issues and all, I do appreciate the persistence.
Yeah, it was totally my pleasure.
And for everyone else, I want you to have a wonderful day and go out and live your unconventional life.
This has been An Unconventional Life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe now to keep getting inspirational stories of unconventional lives as soon as they're released. Until then, go out and live your best unconventional life.